Welcome to the 14th class on the structure and details of the second Beis Hamikdash. So in the previous classes we learned about the Heichel, we also learned about the measurements of the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim, and in this class we're going to learn about the Kalim that were in the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim. So for starters, the Kalim and the Kodesh were either in the inner third, which would be this area right here, or in the inner half of the Kodesh. There are two opinions in the Rambam itself exactly where they were located, and we're going to follow the opinion that they were in the inner half. So we're going to start with the Shulchan. So the Shulchan was 1 amma wide and 2 ammas long, which is around 1.5 feet by 3 feet. And the length of the Shulchan was in the same direction as the length of the Kodesh. So we have the length of the Shulchan going this way, also the Kodesh is this way. Now I just want to point out that we know that the Shulchan was in this section of the Kodesh, and we know that the Shulchan was on the right side when you'd come in, or you could say the Tzafin or north side. However, exactly where it was located is not mentioned in the Rambam, it's just placed here so you could imagine around where it would be. Now moving along, we have the menorah. Now regarding the menorah, the only measurement we have of the menorah is the height. So it was just made over here to be the same as the Shulchan in terms of being 2 ammas by 1 amma. However, that measurement is not actually mentioned anywhere. And different than the Shulchan, the length of the menorah was placed along the width of the Kodesh. As you can see here, that the length of the menorah is this way, which fits with the width of the Kodesh, not the length of the Kodesh. And then finally we have the Mizbeach Hakteris, which was 1 amma by 1 amma, so this is scaled down to size. We have the measurements, and it was 2 ammas high. Now regarding the placement of the Mizbeach, it seems that this is actually the correct placement, because if the Kalim were all within this half, it would seem that means that right after this half, this point, there was an actual Kli, which would be the Mizbeach. Now regarding the Mizbeach being removed outside of the area between the Shulchan and the menorah, so the Mizbeach was pulled to the east, towards the opening of the Kodesh, because the Pasuk says, V'asa menorah noichach ha-Shulchan, which means that there shouldn't be anything in between the menorah and the Shulchan. And now we'll move along to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So the Aron, which was placed right in the center of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, it was 1.5 ammas wide, and it was 2.5 ammas long, and like the menorah, its length was placed along the width of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. It wasn't placed this way, then it would fit with the length and the length, but rather its length was in this direction like this, which fits with the width of the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now, in addition, regarding the Aron was placed on the Even HaShasiyah, and there is a discussion whether the Even HaShasiyah was completely flat with the ground of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, or whether it was somewhat elevated. If it was elevated, it says that it was 3 etzba'is high, 3 fingers high. And in front of the Aron, there was a container of mun and the mate Aron. Now you have to keep in mind that all of this was true during the time of Beis Rishon, most of the time of Beis Rishon. However, towards the end of the time of the Beis Rishon and throughout the Beis Sheni, the Aron, the container of mun, and the mate Aron were not in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, but rather they were hidden underneath the ground in chambers that were made over there to keep them. Now, we all know a very famous thing about the Aron, that it says, Makim ma'aron eina min amida. So let's just review this briefly. So we have over here the Aron, again, it's all scaled down to size. It's 2.5 ammas by 1.5 amma, but nevertheless, if you would measure from any one of the walls of the Kodesh HaKadoshim to any of the walls of the Aron, the measurements would be 10 ammas. So on one hand, we have the Aron measuring 2.5 ammas this way, 1.5 ammas this way, and the Kodesh HaKadoshim measured 20 ammas by 20 ammas, and nevertheless, if you measured from any of these walls over here to any of the walls of the Aron, each of the measurements would be 10 ammas, which is something which is completely impossible to understand, because we have, for example, Teva, nature, that's something we could understand, and we see regularly. Then you have things that are a nes, which is a miracle, so that's not something you could see and understand, but you could imagine it. And then you have the Makim ma'aron eina min amida, which is the idea of nimna hanimnois, because it's both nature and above nature at the same time. Because on one hand, it did take up space, it did have a measurement, and at the same time, it didn't take up space. And where you could see how it's impossible to imagine it is if you'd place a measurement from here to here. So on this end over here, it would say 0 ammas. Over here, it would say 20 ammas. Now, what would it say here and here? That's something which is impossible to even imagine. And same thing if you'd measure from here to here. Over here it would say 0 amos, here it would say 20 amos, but what would it say on this end of the measurement and at this end of the measurement on the two sides of the aron? That's something which is impossible to even imagine, and that's the idea of nimna hanimnois. And with that, we'll end this class.